The wind howls through the skeletal remains of what was once a thriving mining settlement in the Montana Territory, 1873. Snow swirls violently around abandoned buildings, their wooden frames creaking ominously against the relentless storm. The camera moves through the desolate main street, past broken windows and collapsed roofs, until it reaches a small, weathered cabin at the edge of town where a thin line of smoke rises from a crooked chimney. Margaret Collins, 67, sits hunched over a dying fire, her weathered hands trembling as she feeds the last pieces of a broken chair into the flames. Her face, carved by years of hardship and recent grief, reflects the orange glow. The cabin is sparse, almost empty. Frost covers the inside of the windows. Her breath is visible in the frigid air. A distant gunshot echoes through the valley. Margaret freezes, her eyes darting toward the door. Another shot, closer this time. Then silence, save for the wind's mournful cry. She moves to the window, wiping away the frost with her sleeve. Through the blizzard, she can barely make out shapes moving in the darkness. Riders, perhaps 3 or 4, their forms ghostly in the swirling snow. They seem to be searching for something, or someone. The riders disappear into the storm as quickly as they appeared. Margaret returns to the fire, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. On the mantel above the fireplace sits a daguerreotype of her late husband Thomas, killed 2 winters ago in a mining accident that many whispered wasn't accidental. Beside it, a deed to worthless land and a letter marked with an official seal, unopened. She reaches for the letter, her fingers hesitating over the wax seal. Before she can open it, heavy footsteps crunch through the snow outside. Margaret extinguishes the lamp, plunging the cabin into near darkness save for the firelight. A weak knock at the door. Margaret grabs Thomas's old rifle from beside the fireplace, though she knows it hasn't held ammunition in months. The knocking comes again, more urgent now, followed by a voice speaking in a language she doesn't recognize but somehow understands as a plea for help. She approaches the door cautiously. Through a crack in the wood, she sees an elderly Native American man collapsed against her doorframe. Joseph Crow Feather, 82, his long gray hair matted with snow, his traditional clothing torn and bloodied. His lips are blue with cold, his breathing shallow. Margaret hesitates. The territorial conflicts between settlers and tribes have been escalating. Trust is a luxury few can afford. But the man is clearly dying. She opens the door. Joseph falls forward into her arms, surprisingly light, his body racked with violent shivering. She helps him to the fire, where he collapses onto the floor. In the firelight, she can see a bullet wound in his shoulder, the blood frozen to his shirt. Margaret examines the wound. It's serious but not fatal if treated properly. She tears strips from her own dress to create bandages, working silently as Joseph drifts in and out of consciousness. Outside, the storm intensifies, but now there's something else mixed with the wind's voice. The sound of horses, growing closer. Joseph's eyes snap open, alert despite his condition. He grabs Margaret's wrist with surprising strength and whispers in heavily accented English, "They come for the truth. You must not let them find the papers." "What papers? I don't understand." Joseph's eyes dart to her mantle, to the unopened letter. "Your husband knew. The mine, the accident, it was no accident. They killed him for what he discovered." Margaret's blood runs cold. "Who? Who killed him?" "The mining company. Your husband found something in the deep tunnels. Something that proved the land belonged to my people long before any claim was filed. The deed you have, it's worthless. But what he found." Joseph coughs, blood speckling his lips. "What he found could change everything." The sound of horses is unmistakable now. Voices carry on the wind, men calling to each other, coordinating a search. Margaret looks at the letter on the mantel with new understanding. Thomas sent this before he died. I never opened it because I thought it was just his final wages. Open it now. With trembling fingers, Margaret breaks the seal. Inside is not money, but a map drawn in Thomas's careful hand, marking tunnels beneath the mountain, and with it, a note: "Margaret, if something happens to me, take this to the tribal council. The land beneath Copper Ridge belongs to the Blackfoot. I have proof. The symbols in the deep cave match their sacred markings. The company will kill to keep this secret. Trust Joseph Crow Feather. He knows the truth." Joseph nods weakly. "Your husband was a good man. He died protecting my people's heritage. The horses are now just outside." Torchlight flickers through the window. Rough voices argue about which cabin to search first. Margaret makes a decision that will change everything. She pulls her last possession of any warmth, a thick wool blanket that had been her wedding gift 45 years ago, from her bed. Without hesitation, she wraps it around Joseph's shivering form. "You need this more than I do." Joseph's eyes widen with understanding. "You don't know what you're doing. This blanket, this kindness, it creates a debt that my people take very seriously. I'm not looking for payment. I'm looking for justice." The cabin door explodes inward. 3 men in heavy coats enter, their faces hard and scarred by the frontier life. The leader, Samuel Hartwell, carries a smoking torch and a Colt revolver. His cold eyes scan the cabin before settling on Joseph. "Well, well. The old redskin thought he could hide from us." Hartwell's voice carries the authority of a man accustomed to taking what he wants. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble, old man." Margaret steps protectively in front of Joseph, despite having no weapon. "This man is hurt and seeking shelter. By territorial law, I have the right to offer sanctuary." Hartwell laughs, a sound devoid of humor. "Territorial law? Ma'am, out here, the only law is what we make it. And right now, we're making it real simple. Hand over whatever that Indian stole from the mining office, and we'll be on our way." "I don't know what you're talking about." One of Hartwell's men, Davies, steps forward and backhands Margaret across the face. She staggers but doesn't fall. Blood trickles from her split lip. "Don't lie to us, widow. We know your husband was working with the tribes. We know he took something that didn't belong to him before his unfortunate accident." Joseph struggles to his feet, the blanket still wrapped around him. Despite his injuries, there's dignity in his bearing. The woman knows nothing. "Your business is with me." "That's where you're wrong, old man. Our business became her business the moment she decided to help you." Hartwell raises his gun toward Margaret. In that moment, Joseph does something unexpected. He begins to sing, his voice growing stronger with each note. It's a traditional Blackfoot war song, and though Margaret doesn't understand the words, she feels their power. The sound seems to carry beyond the cabin walls, beyond the storm itself. Hartwell's men shift nervously. Superstition runs deep in men who live by violence. "Shut him up," Hartwell snarls. But before anyone can move, answering calls echo through the storm. War cries that send chills down the spine of every man in the cabin. The sound of many horses, moving fast through the snow. Davies rushes to the window. "Boss, we got company. Looks like half the reservation is heading this way." Hartwell's confidence wavers. He's used to intimidating isolated settlers and lone travelers, not facing an entire war party in a blizzard. Joseph's song reaches its crescendo, then stops abruptly. In the sudden silence, his voice carries with ceremonial authority, "You have violated the sacred law of hospitality. This woman offered shelter and warmth to a stranger. By our oldest laws, she is now under the protection of the Blackfoot Nation." "That's Indian nonsense," Hartwell spits, but his voice lacks conviction. "Is it?" Joseph's eyes gleam in the firelight. "Your mining company has been stealing from sacred burial grounds for 2 years. Taking gold from graves, disturbing the spirits of our ancestors. You think there are no consequences for such acts?" Margaret realizes that the true conflict runs much deeper than she imagined. This isn't just about land rights or mining claims. It's about desecration, about a systematic violation of sacred spaces. The war cries are getting closer. Hartwell makes a desperate calculation. He could kill both Margaret and Joseph right now, but the approaching war party would ensure his own death. He could flee, but that would mean admitting defeat to men who work for him. This isn't over, he growls, backing toward the door. The mining company owns this territory, and will collect what's owed to us. Some debts, Joseph says quietly, cannot be paid with gold. As Hartwell and his men disappear into the storm, Margaret sinks into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelation about her husband's death and the dangerous knowledge she now possesses. The map in her hands feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. Joseph watches her carefully. You understand now why they killed your husband? Thomas wasn't just trying to help your people. He was trying to expose grave robbing. The gold they've been mining comes from sacred burial sites. Each nugget they pull from the earth is cursed with the blood of our ancestors. Your husband documented everything before they silenced him. The approaching horses grow silent. Through the window, Margaret sees torches surrounding her cabin, but these riders wait respectfully at a distance. Joseph struggles to stand, still wrapped in Margaret's blanket. My grandsons have come for me. But first, I must honor the debt created here tonight. I told you, I don't want payment. This is not about what you want. This is about what honor demands. Joseph's voice carries the weight of tradition. You gave your last source of warmth to save a stranger's life. In doing so, you have bound yourself to my family by the oldest laws of our people. Margaret looks around her empty cabin, at the dying fire, at the evidence of Thomas's murder in her hands. She has nothing left to lose and everything to gain by trusting this man. What does that mean, exactly? Joseph smiles, and for the first time since entering her cabin, he looks not like a dying old man but like a patriarch with the power to change lives. It means, Margaret Collins, that you are no longer alone in this world. And it means that by tomorrow's sunset, those who killed your husband will understand that some acts of kindness carry consequences they never imagined. Outside, a deep voice calls in Blackfoot. Joseph responds in the same language, his voice carrying authority that penetrates the storm. Margaret realizes that her simple act of compassion has set in motion events that will reshape the entire territory. The widow who had nothing left to give has just gifted something that will return to her multiplied beyond her wildest dreams. But first, there will be a reckoning. The dying fire flickers as if touched by wind that carries the whispers of ancient spirits, and Margaret Collins understands that her story is far from over. It's only just beginning. Dawn breaks over the Montana Territory with an eerie crimson light that paints the snow-covered landscape in shades of blood and gold. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Margaret Collins stands at her cabin window, watching as the Blackfoot warriors who surrounded her home during the night begin to move with purpose she doesn't yet understand. Running Bear, Joseph's eldest grandson, approaches the cabin. He's a man in his 30s with the bearing of someone who has seen both war and peace, his face marked by a scar that runs from his left temple to his jaw. Behind him walks Swift Arrow, younger but equally formidable, carrying something wrapped in deer hide. Joseph emerges from the cabin, Margaret's wedding blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, but now he moves with renewed strength. The bullet wound has been tended to with traditional medicines his grandsons brought, and his eyes burn with purpose. Margaret steps outside, her breath forming clouds in the frigid morning air. She's wearing her husband's old coat, several sizes too large, the only warm garment she has left. My grandsons have brought news, Joseph says, his voice carrying across the stillness. The mining company believes they won last night. They think fear will keep you silent about what your husband discovered. Running Bear speaks in Blackfoot to his grandfather, his words urgent. Joseph's expression darkens as he listens. What is it? Margaret asks, though she dreads the answer. Hartwell and his men didn't return to town. They went directly to the mining camp and began destroying evidence. They're burning documents, collapsing tunnel entrances, erasing any proof of what they've done to our sacred grounds. Swift Arrow unwraps the bundle he carries, revealing a collection of items that make Margaret's blood run cold. Blackfoot artifacts, clearly ancient, but also modern mining tools stained with what looks suspiciously like dried blood. These were found in Hartwell's saddlebags during the night, Running Bear explains in careful English. My grandfather's war song last night was not just ceremony. It was a call to gather evidence while our enemies believed themselves safe. Margaret realizes the full scope of what happened. While she and Joseph were confronting Hartwell, the Blackfoot warriors were systematically investigating the mining operation, collecting proof of the desecration and possibly much more. Joseph holds up a leather journal, its pages yellowed and worn. This belonged to the mining camp foreman. It contains records of every grave they've robbed, every sacred item they've stolen and sold. But more importantly, it contains the names of buyers. Wealthy collectors in San Francisco, Denver, even as far as New York, who pay premium prices for authentic Indian artifacts. They've been running a grave robbing operation disguised as a mining company, Margaret breathes, the full horror of it sinking in. Your husband discovered this when he found the burial chamber deep in the mountain. The symbols he documented weren't just proof of our ancestral claim to the land. They were markers indicating the resting place of our most sacred chiefs. Men who were buried with items of immense spiritual value to our people. Swift Arrow produces another item from the bundle, a golden eagle feather encrusted with turquoise and silver, clearly ancient and priceless. Margaret has never seen anything so beautiful or so obviously sacred. This belonged to Chief Iron Wolf, my great-great-grandfather, who died defending our land from the cavalry 20 years ago. It should have remained with his bones for eternity. Instead, it was being prepared for shipment to a private collector in San Francisco who offered $5,000 for authentic Blackfoot ceremonial items. The sum is staggering. Margaret's entire cabin isn't worth $50. So this was never really about mining at all. The mining was secondary, Joseph confirms. A cover story that allowed them to dig where they pleased without raising suspicions about their true purpose. They've been systematically looting our sacred sites for over 2 years. Running Bear steps forward, his expression grave. But now we face a problem. With the evidence destroyed and Hartwell's men armed and desperate, they will not simply retreat. They will try to eliminate anyone who can testify against them. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses echoes across the valley. But these are not Blackfoot ponies. The steady rhythm and heavy hoofbeats indicate cavalry mounts, and many of them. Through the morning mist, a column of blue-uniformed soldiers emerges, led by Captain Henry Morrison, a career officer whose rigid posture and grim expression suggest a man accustomed to unpleasant duties. Beside him rides Territorial Judge William Crawford, a politician whose expensive clothes and soft features mark him as someone more familiar with boardrooms than battlefields. The column halts 50 yards from Margaret's cabin, but their positioning clearly surrounds the Blackfoot warriors. It's not a negotiation. It's a siege. Captain Morrison dismounts and approaches under a white flag, but his hand rests on his saber hilt. By order of the territorial governor, all persons present are commanded to surrender immediately for questioning regarding the theft of mining company property. Joseph laughs, a sound devoid of humor. Theft. They accuse us of stealing what was stolen from our ancestors' graves. Judge Crawford urges his horse forward, staying safely behind the line of soldiers. The law is clear. Any artifacts found on legally claimed mining land belong to the claimant. The Copper Ridge Mining Company has filed charges of theft and conspiracy against all parties involved in last night's raid. What about the charges of murder against Thomas Collins? Margaret steps forward, her voice carrying across the morning air. What about the desecration of burial grounds? What about the illegal trafficking of stolen artifacts? Those are serious accusations that require proof, Crawford replies smoothly. Proof that, unfortunately, was destroyed in a tragic fire at the mining camp last night. Margaret's heart sinks. They've covered their tracks perfectly. But Joseph smiles, and Margaret realizes there's something she doesn't know yet. Judge Crawford, Joseph says with formal courtesy, "You speak of proof as if it no longer exists. But you forget that some truths cannot be burned." Joseph nods to Swift Arrow, who produces yet another item from his seemingly endless bundle. This time it's a metal cylinder, the kind used to protect important documents during transport. "Your husband was more clever than his killers realized," Joseph explains to Margaret. "Before his death, he created multiple copies of his discoveries. He hid them in places he knew I would eventually find them." Margaret stares at the cylinder. "Thomas knew you before he died. We met in secret many times. He was documenting not just the burial sites, but the entire criminal operation. Names, dates, financial records, correspondence with buyers. Everything needed to expose the truth." Judge Crawford's face has gone pale. "That's impossible. All documents were recovered and destroyed." Running Bear steps forward with a second cylinder. Then Swift Arrow produces a third. Margaret realizes that Thomas had been far more thorough and far more prescient than anyone imagined. "My husband knew they would kill him," she whispers. "He knew, and he prepared accordingly. But he also knew that exposing the truth would require more than just evidence. It would require the right moment and the right allies." Joseph's eyes meet Margaret's. "It would require someone the mining company couldn't simply dismiss or silence. Someone whose word would carry weight in territorial court." Margaret doesn't understand until Joseph continues. "A widow whose husband died under suspicious circumstances. A woman who lost everything but still chose to show kindness to a stranger. Someone whose story would resonate with judges and juries across the territory." The full scope of Thomas's plan becomes clear. He hadn't just been collecting evidence. He'd been setting up a scenario where that evidence would have maximum impact. Captain Morrison grows impatient. "Whatever documents you think you possess, they won't change the immediate situation. You're outnumbered and surrounded. Surrender now, and you'll be treated fairly under military law." Joseph looks at Margaret with an expression she's beginning to recognize. The same look he had when he spoke of honor and debts the night before. "Captain Morrison, you speak of surrender as if we are criminals. But perhaps you should ask your commanding officer about the telegraph he received from Fort Benton this morning." Morrison's confidence wavers slightly. "What telegraph?" "The one informing him that federal marshals are en route to investigate reports of organized grave robbing on federal territory. The one explaining that this case now falls under federal jurisdiction, not territorial authority." Judge Crawford's horse shies nervously, responding to its rider's sudden tension. "That's impossible. I received no notification of federal involvement." Swift Arrow produces a final item from his bundle. Not an artifact this time, but a telegram, still bearing the official seals and timestamps that prove its authenticity. Margaret realizes that the Blackfoot warriors had done more than gather evidence during the night. They'd somehow managed to communicate with federal authorities, possibly through the fort's telegraph system. "You see," Joseph explains, "some of us have learned to use the white man's methods as effectively as the white man uses ours. While Hartwell was destroying evidence at the mining camp, my people were ensuring that evidence reached authorities beyond his influence." The sound of more horses approaches, but these come from the opposite direction. Margaret turns to see a small group of riders bearing federal badges, led by U.S. Marshal James Wyatt, whose reputation for integrity and persistence has made him both respected and feared throughout the territory. Marshal Wyatt dismounts and surveys the standoff with the practiced eye of a man who has broken up more than his share of tense situations. "Captain Morrison, Judge Crawford," he nods professionally to each man. "I believe there's been some confusion about jurisdiction here." Crawford attempts to maintain his authority. "Marshal, this is a territorial matter involving theft of private property." "Actually, Judge, it's a federal matter involving the systematic desecration of Native American burial grounds, which falls under the Indian Protection Act of 1864. It's also a federal matter involving interstate trafficking of stolen cultural artifacts, which violates several federal commerce laws." Wyatt approaches Joseph with visible respect. Mr. Crow Feather, I received your testimony via telegraph, along with preliminary evidence forwarded through Fort Benton. I understand you have additional materials for federal review. Joseph hands over the metal cylinders. Marshal, these contain documentation compiled by Thomas Collins before his murder, along with evidence gathered by my people documenting 2 years of systematic grave robbing and artifact trafficking. Murder? Captain Morrison interrupts. The official report states that Thomas Collins died in a mining accident. The official report, Marshal Wyatt says dryly, is being investigated for falsification. We have witnesses who can testify that Mr. Collins was killed to prevent him from exposing this operation. Margaret steps forward, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she's revealing. Marshal, I have additional evidence. Letters from my husband, documents he left for me, and testimony about threats made against him before his death. As Margaret produces Thomas's final letter and the map of the burial sites, she realizes that this moment represents more than just legal proceedings. It represents the convergence of justice, tradition, and the kind of courage that her husband had shown in his final days. But Joseph isn't finished. He turns to address Captain Morrison directly. Captain, before you decide which side of history you want to be remembered on, you should know that this matter extends beyond simple grave robbing. The mining company has been selling artifacts to private collectors who ship them east to wealthy buyers. Some of those buyers include government officials, military contractors, and federal judges. The implication hangs in the air like smoke. This isn't just a local criminal operation. It's part of a larger network of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of territorial and possibly federal government. Marshal Wyatt's expression hardens. Are you suggesting that federal officials are involved in this trafficking operation? Joseph produces one final document, this one bearing official letterheads and stamps. I'm not suggesting anything, Marshal. I'm providing evidence. Correspondence between Judge Crawford and collectors in Denver, discussing specific items stolen from our sacred sites. Crawford's face goes from pale to ashen. This is preposterous. I've never. Judge Crawford, Wyatt interrupts, you're under arrest for conspiracy to traffic in stolen cultural artifacts and for obstruction of justice in the matter of Thomas Collins's murder. The morning sun has risen fully now, casting long shadows across the snow as federal marshals move to take Crawford into custody. Captain Morrison, recognizing the shift in power, orders his men to stand down and cooperate with the federal investigation. Margaret watches the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice for Thomas is finally within reach, but the cost has been enormous. Joseph approaches her as the legal machinery continues around them. Your husband's sacrifice will not be forgotten. Our sacred items will be returned to their proper resting places. The desecration will end. And what happens now? Margaret asks, looking around at her empty cabin, her barren life, her uncertain future. Joseph smiles, and Running Bear and Swift Arrow move to flank him. Now, Margaret Collins, we honor the debt created by your kindness. I told you, I don't need payment. This is not payment. This is family obligation. Joseph's voice carries the weight of ceremony. When you wrapped me in your wedding blanket, you performed an act of such generosity that it bound you to our people by blood and honor. In our tradition, such an act creates kinship that transcends tribal boundaries. Running Bear steps forward and places his hand on Margaret's shoulder. By the laws of our people, you are now under the protection of the Blackfoot Nation. Your needs become our needs. Your shelter becomes our responsibility. Margaret doesn't understand until Swift Arrow begins speaking rapidly in Blackfoot to the assembled warriors. They respond with calls and gestures that clearly indicate unanimous agreement with something significant. What are they saying? Joseph translates with obvious pride. They are saying that the widow who gave her last blanket to save a stranger's life will never be cold again. They are saying that the woman who chose justice over safety will never be homeless again. As the legal proceedings continue around them, the Blackfoot warriors begin to move with coordinated purpose. Some ride toward the forest, others toward the town, still others toward the abandoned mining camp. Margaret realizes they're implementing a plan that was decided long before dawn. "Joseph, what's happening? You gave me your last source of warmth to save my life. In return, my people will ensure you have warmth that will last the rest of your days." Joseph's eyes gleam with something that looks remarkably like joy. "By tonight, Margaret Collins, you will understand why acts of kindness to strangers are the most sacred of all human behaviors." The sun climbs higher, melting the snow and revealing the promise of spring beneath the winter's harsh facade. Margaret stands in her empty doorway, watching as her simple act of compassion ripples outward into consequences she never could have imagined. Justice for Thomas, safety for the Blackfoot burial grounds, and something else. Something that Joseph's words suggest will transform her life in ways she can't yet comprehend. But first, there are still mysteries to unravel, debts to honor, and promises to keep. The story is far from over.